The Terminator franchise is one of those things that just is. It's sort of like with the Alien movies. In my brain, I don't really qualify these IPs as franchises. Look, there were two epic movies that came out a long time ago, and then a bunch of other shovelware the studios just kept churning out every now and then just to get your hopes up. Okay, I actually did kind of like Alien Romulus, but if you stop and think too hard about the plot of that one, it'll make your head hurt. Terminator 3 wasn't awful or anything, but it had no reason to exist other than just rehashing the same ideas for a fresh paycheck. And despite the fact that Terminator Dark Fate was such an epic failure of a movie, I'll confess I did like Arnold Schwarzenegger's performance in that one, so it was worth sitting through at least once just for that. Well, almost. Anyway, with such a storied franchise as the Terminator, then it's no surprise that several attempts were made to cash in on the film's broad appeal with a big long slew of video games based on the material, all of which had varied degrees of quality. Some were pretty good, like the Sega CD version of Terminator, which I've covered before on the channel. It's just a solid action platformer where you play as Kyle Reese in his smelly hobo pants, blasting your way through 1984 Los Angeles trying to save Sarah Connor from the Terminator. Most people will probably have memories of the clunky and awful Terminator games on the NES and Super NES, although I'll say that RoboCop vs. Terminator is actually kind of fun and worth checking out. There were some other oddities that I'll have to dig into later, like a DOS Terminator game where you actually play as the Terminator trying to kill Sarah Connor back in the first movie. There's also the arcade game that I've covered before, and it's super fun and pretty to look at, but really it's just a quarter-munching shooter without much depth to it. Well, recently, the independent developer Bitmap Bureau took it upon themselves to develop the definitive Terminator game once and for all, focusing specifically on Terminator 2 Judgment Day. And that's how it came to be that in October of 2025, we got Terminator 2D. No Fate. This is available for basically every modern system and is a beautiful side-scrolling shooter done in the style of 16-bit Super NES era classics. So think Contra 3 but with the Terminator. This game is kind of a remix of the main story from the film Terminator 2 Judgment Day. It takes scenes, stories, and ideas from the movie and expands upon them into something they could make a level out of. For example, at the beginning of the game, you play as Sarah Connor and you're out in the desert with John. Sarah is having John do target practice with her supply of guns when a biker gang shows up, and it's led by Woody Harrelson? So anyway, they kidnap John Connor and hold him for ransom unless Sarah gives them her supply of guns. Not really sure why this level exists, other than maybe just being a tutorial. Doesn't matter anyway, it's just an excuse to mow down a bunch of dudes and get a feel for the controls. Then the next stage has Sarah breaking into a Cyberdyne Systems lab to see what they're up to. So this is all taking place before the events of Terminator 2 Judgment Day, but parts of this were sort of referenced in the film, such as how Sarah Connor ended up in the mental institution in the first place when she tries to blow up a Cyberdyne lab. I'd compare it to the Super Star Wars games for the Super Nintendo, where it just takes one random scene or idea from the film, and it's like, hey, how could we make a whole level out of that? And for the most part, it works. Like, remember when the Terminator walks into a bar butt naked after making the time jump and needs to get some clothes and a vehicle? Well, here you go, and it's one of the only times you get to play as Arnold in the game. He's not nearly as nimble as Sarah or future John Connor here. He does not run, jump, or duck, and he doesn't have a weapon. But he doesn't need much of anything here. He's a frickin' Terminator. This area plays in more like a Double Dragon punch him up and beat him up kind of way. Except that you get to be Arnold Schwarzenegger as the Terminator. Except actually, you're really not Arnold Schwarzenegger, so for reasons I'm not entirely clear about, they got the rights to use everyone else's likeness in the game, Eddie Furlong, Robert Patrick, and Linda Hamilton, but no Arnold, and that's unfortunate. It doesn't necessarily make or break the game. I mean, it makes zero difference on how the game plays, but it's just too bad. His character even looks a little different too. He's already got his whole face blown off, down to the exoskeleton in the cutscenes. And then the side-scrolling parts, he looks more like David Hasselhoff. Ha! I'm actually Knight Rider, sent here from the future to save humanity from all of those crappy TV shows. This is a single-player game. You basically just play as whichever character is relevant from that scene in the movie that you're playing through. There's the scenes that take place in the future with fully grown super soldier John Connor blasting through hordes of Terminators and giant mecha death Skynet robots. Honestly, these are probably the most consistently fun levels since you get more power-ups for your weapons, including the spread gun from Contra 3. You'll play as Sarah Connor a lot in the present-day levels, including a level where you have to escape from a mental hospital, and I'll get to that level specifically in a bit. Unfortunately, you really only get to play as the Terminator a couple of times at least that I can find in the main story. Once when you first arrive at the bar, and then again again when you're driving the motorcycle to save John. And then I think after you play through the main campaign at least one time, you get some options to take a different path in the story. And if you take the branching paths, there are at least one or two other levels where you get to play as Arnold Schwarzenegger. But that's pretty much it. Graphics look great. All the 2D pixely splendor you could want. The animations are really well done too, and all of the character sprites are super detailed. There's the big chunky boss battles with giant Skynet war machines we've maybe only seen briefly in the background of the films, as well as some new stuff, and it's all just fun. I played on no problemo difficulty, and for the most part, I felt like that was a good balance. There are a few easier modes though if you want. There's little cool things here too, like when you're controlling the Terminator on the motorcycle, it's got that perfect little rotation when Arnold reloads the shotgun, just like in the movie. And Sarah kinda swings a bit when you jump and catch yourself on a ladder. I don't know, I just thought that was cool looking. They also got a lot of the sound effects just right too. It's like they had a direct line to the soundboard off the films. It's little details like that. Not everyone may notice, but you can tell the developers really wanted to go the extra mile to pull you back into the world of the Terminator. There's some other little things, like when the T-1000 is chasing you in the semi. If you blow it here and get knocked off the motorcycle, they could have just cut to the game over screen. Okay. But no. The T-1000 casually hops out of the semi, walks over, and straight up murders John with his knife hands. Take that, future boy! Then he stands there for a minute admiring his handiwork. Job well done, eh? That's messed up. The soundtrack is excellent with spiritual roots in the original Brad Fiedel score from the films, while also doing some of its own thing, and it all just works. They even coughed up the money to use those Dwight Yoakam and George Thorogood tracks from the bar scene. You could punch the jukebox to switch it over to Bad to the Bone. I especially loved the soundtrack in the mental hospital level. This level may have weirdly been my favorite level from the game. You're playing as Sarah Connor and you're trying to escape the mental hospital to meet up with John and the Terminator. You can't just brute force your way through this because at this point in the movie, the only weapon Sarah has is a nightstick that she picks up off of one of the security guards. You have to sneak around avoiding detection by guards, cops, and security cameras, and you'll need to duck into hallway closets to avoid being seen. When the T-1000 shows up, it was genuinely tense, since Sarah is utterly defenseless here, especially when he's chasing you down a hallway and you have to quickly pick a lock to get to the next area. I felt like the level design in just about all of these levels was pretty good. Not like the Sega CD Terminator where it's intentionally annoying just trying to figure out where you're supposed to go with a bunch of tedious stage hazards thrown in that made no sense other than to make the level as stupidly hard to navigate as possible. I actually think the funnest levels end up being the ones where they expanded a bit on stuff only briefly shown or mentioned in the movie. Not so much the first level where you're just up against some desert gang, but the mental hospital level, all of the future levels since you get the best guns and power-ups, and Soldier John Connor is probably the funnest to control. Meanwhile, I did not like the motorcycle chase levels at all. It's a bit clunky how your vehicle moves, and there's only two places in the horizontal plane where your vehicle can go, left or right lane. I kept wanting to be a bit more precise with my movements and had to force my brain to just think of it as only two places where the bike could go, up or down. It took me several tries to get through this part. I also hated the helicopter chase level. It's just, It was tedious in the arcade version, and it's tedious here. Looks good though. Oh, and that's another thing I'm not crazy about. In their efforts to make this game more authentic to the Contra 3 classic run-and-gun shooters of old, you only get a finite amount of continues and then you have to start over from the beginning. Now, okay, I grew up in this era, and I totally get what they were going for here. They were trying to bring that classic gaming mindset back. That's just how we played games back then. You got none, or if you were lucky, you got maybe 3 continues, and then if you ran out of continues, it was back to level 1. The goal here supposedly was to try to force you to keep replaying the earlier levels so you can
get good.
That way you can make it all the way through to the end without dying and using up all of your continues. I got it back then, I still get it now, but it doesn't mean I have to like it. I feel like too, sometimes that's really just a way to make a short game feel longer. Let's not kid ourselves here. The programmers did this just so that you wouldn't rent the game on a Friday night, take the whole weekend to beat it, and then take it back on Monday and they don't see another dime. This has nothing to do with getting good, this was just how they did business back then. Now take the recent Shredder's Revenge, which goes the total other way with it, and you can basically backtrack and replay any level you choose, pick up where you left off, continues just aren't really a thing in story mode, and if you do want that authentic experience with no continues, you can play in the arcade mode. I'd argue that arcade mode back in the day had infinite continues because in reality, you could continue so long as you could keep finding quarters in the bottom of your pocket. So again, I'm not sure if they were just trying to make Terminator 2D feel longer since it's actually a really short game. I will say that my kids and I keep replaying random levels in Shredder's Revenge over and over again, and the lack of a continue system in storyline mode along with the overworld layout actually made that way easier to facilitate. Now I'll take it backwards and say that if this game actually came out on Super NES back in the 90s alongside the movie, and I'm sure a lot of other people would have had no problem paying full price for this. And I'm talking full price Super Nintendo game for this, which probably was, what, 50, 60 bucks? This is an awesome game and truly stands right up there with some of the great 16-bit shooters of that era. It's a love letter to not just the Terminator movies, but all of these classic run-and-gun games of old. I mean, look at this right here, straight out of Contra 3. But if you're trying to sell this to modern audiences and all of the short attention spans, the inconvenience of having to start over from the beginning may be too much of a nuisance for some. Now look, before you flame the comments, I say all of that only because I want more games like this to get made, and I'm rooting for Bitmap Bureau and other developers who want to try to get this sort of thing out there. But if you want to get people to pay $30 for a game that's really only an hour long, with a dozen or so levels, let's try to make it as accessible for everybody as possible. I know there's only so many old nostalgic dudes like me who would love more games like this and don't mind the added difficulty that gamers were up against back in the day. The point I'm trying to make here, though, is that there may not be enough people like me out there to financially sustain these types of games getting made going forward. Now, I went off on that ramble long enough. I'll say that there's some good news. Just like back in the day, you can use a cheat code. If you go into the accessibility menu and put your cursor on the CRT shader option, rapidly press left and right on the D-pad until you hear the voice say access granted. Go back in the main menu and boom, cheat menu unlocked. There you go, infinite continues. Full disclosure, I needed to get this video done and didn't have time to keep practicing levels over and over again, so I used infinite continues. I didn't use infinite health just because I felt like that's a bridge too far, but infinite continues was what I needed. And to be fair, they did put some other cool things in there that you probably wouldn't have been able to cram into a Super NES cartridge, such as an option in the menus to just practice levels over and over again before you get into the full story campaign. I would have maybe just preferred an overworld option, again like what they did in Shredder's Revenge, so you can just backtrack if you want to. Maybe keep trying to go for the best time or whatever. And Shredder's Revenge had a soft leveling system where your characters would level up and get a little more powerful with new abilities the more you played. Plus, there were just levels that were really fun to keep replaying. My kids and I have replayed this level at least 30 times. Seriously, I freaking love the music of this level too. And although maybe it wouldn't have made sense within the context of the story specific to each level in the game, it would have been nice if they included a two-player option somehow. I say all of this again because I understand they were probably concerned about it being such a short game and they're trying to squeeze more replayability out of it and give people their money's worth. Well, I guess I just pretty much consider Shredder's Revenge to be the gold standard for how to do that with this type of old-fashioned game. In that regard, Terminator 2D felt lacking a bit, and I just worry that people are going to maybe play through the game one time and then just move on to something else. Or worse, they'll think it doesn't look like it's worth the money and just skip it entirely, and then we don't get any more games like this. That option stinks too. There are a couple of branching pathways in the main campaign where if you make a choice, you get to play through a couple of different level variants, but that might not be enough for some folks. All of that being said, I really hope that this game does well, because I still think it's just an absolutely stellar love letter to the 16-bit era as well as to the Terminator movies. Well, the good ones anyway. Excellent graphics, big chunky over-the-top boss fights, good controls, and an incredible soundtrack that takes you right back into the movies. If you're a fan of Contra 3 or Terminator, you should definitely check this one out. It is a bit pricier for no more than what it is, but I'd just say try to think of that as supporting the developers so that more games like this do get made. And before anyone says anything in the comments, no, I was not given a free copy of this game just because I'm a YouTuber. They didn't even reach out to me. I just saw the game was getting made and bought my own copy on Steam. Paid full price for it just like everyone else. And I have no regrets about that. It's a really fun game. I liked it a lot. They definitely want to keep making games like this. Otherwise, all we have is the old games that we've all played dozens of times. Anyway, as always, thank you for watching. Please don't text and drive, and I'll see you next time on Friday Night Arcade.